Human shared his fire with a silent alien girl. By morning, she finally whispered why she ran. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The wind rolled across the frozen ridge like a living thing, scraping icy grains against Ethan Cole's cheeks as he crouched beside the small fire he'd managed to coax from a handful of dry bark. The glow barely pushed back the cold, flickering orange against the hull of his disabled survey skimmer. His breath drifted in tight, white ribbons. Then he saw her, or maybe just the outline at first. A faint blue shape collapsed near the treeline. He stood, boots crunching through the snow crust, every instinct telling him no one should be out here at this hour. Not in temperatures that dipped well below zero. But as he got closer, the shape became a girl, small, thin, wrapped in nothing but a torn thermal wrap barely clinging to her shoulders. Her skin, a pale blue with a faint silver sheen, looked too cold even for this world. She didn't react when he knelt, didn't flinch, didn't speak, just breathed in shallow, frightened pulls. Ethan shrugged off his insulated jacket and draped it gently over her narrow frame. She trembled once, like a startled bird, but didn't resist. Easy, he murmured, more breath than sound. You're freezing. Come sit by the fire. She didn't answer, but when he carefully helped her to her feet, she let him. Her fingers were stiff as ice against his gloves. Back at the fire, Ethan settled her near the warmest spot, adjusting the jacket around her shoulders. She curled inward, hands hovering near the flames, but never touching the warmth, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed. He tried offering water. She hesitated, then accepted it with both hands, sipping carefully. Still no voice. Still no name. She only watched him with wide, quiet eyes the color of winter dusk. Ethan didn't press her. Didn't need answers right now. The cold demanded silence anyway. Hours stretched, the sky darkening to a deep cobalt, while the fire crackled softly between them. She kept glancing at him, as though expecting something, some demand, some price. But Ethan only added another piece of wood and nudged the flames higher. You're safe here, he said softly when he noticed her drifting into uneasy sleep. She didn't reply, but for the first time, her shoulders lowered just a little. And as the night thickened around them, Ethan leaned back against his skimmer, letting the fire's warmth reach them both, unaware that by morning, the girl with the silent eyes would finally whisper the truth of why she had run, and why she feared the fire as much as the cold. The fire had burned low by the time Ethan realized the girl was awake again. She sat very still, her knees drawn close beneath his oversized jacket, watching the embers pulse like tiny hearts in the dark. Snow sifted down in thin, drifting sheets, landing on her hair and melting instantly against the lingering warmth of the flames. Ethan added another piece of wood, the sparks rising in a soft swirl before fading into the night. She flinched at the sudden glow, just a slight movement, but enough for him to notice. The fire will not hurt you, he said gently. I promise. She lowered her gaze, fingers tightening around the edge of the jacket as though trying to anchor herself. Her breathing remained shallow, careful, as if each inhale required permission. Ethan scooted a little farther back to give her space, letting the fire sit between them like a quiet referee. The ridge behind them groaned with the shifting of frozen branches, and she tensed again. He raised a calm hand. It is just the wind. Nothing else. For a long moment, she listened, searching the darkness with eyes that reflected the firelight in silver streaks. Only when she was satisfied did her shoulders ease. Ethan handed her a heat pack from his kit. She stared at it, as if unsure what to do. He demonstrated by squeezing another in his own hands until it warmed. Slowly, she mirrored his movement. When the heat spread across her palms, her expression softened with something close to awe. It was the smallest smile, but he saw it. There you go, Ethan said softly. Better than nothing. The girl shifted closer to the fire by an inch, maybe two. Her hair, pale and slightly metallic in the glow, framed her face like frost tracing a window pane. She watched him occasionally, always quick glances, always cautious. Ethan busied himself checking the skimmer's power core, pretending not to notice, but the truth was he felt her gaze each time. The night deepened, the sky turning a darker shade of blue as the twin moons climbed above the ridge. She seemed to follow them with her eyes, her breath slowing as if their presence brought a small comfort. When he returned to sit near the fire, she tilted her head at him, curiosity flickering past the fear. He offered her a protein bar, unwrapped so she would not struggle with the packaging. She accepted it with a quiet nod and ate slowly, almost grateful. Minutes drifted by. The wind softened. The world shrank to the fire, the snow, and the sound of her faint, rhythmic breathing. Then she surprised him. She tugged lightly at his sleeve, barely touching him. When he looked at her, she held out one of the heat packs, warmed and glowing softly. She wanted him to have it. Ethan took it carefully, giving her the same gentle nod she had given him. "Thank you," he said. Something changed in her eyes then, a subtle thaw, like ice beginning to melt under sunlight. She did not speak, but she no longer looked away when the fire brightened. She kept her gaze steady, steady on him, steady on the warmth she had feared minutes earlier. And for the first time since he had found her in the snow, she looked less like someone waiting for danger and more like someone hoping for morning to come. The fire settled into a steady glow as midnight crept over the ridge, its warmth pushing gently against the cold that wrapped the world in silence. Ethan adjusted the insulation panel on the skimmer, checking the charge indicator that blinked an anemic orange. It would not hold through another storm cycle. He glanced toward the girl. She sat exactly where he had left her, knees pulled close beneath his jacket, her hands cupped around the warmth pack as if afraid it might vanish if she loosened her grip. Her eyes were half closed, not quite resting, not quite awake. When the wind shifted and rattled the branches again, she tensed, but not as sharply as before. Ethan lowered himself beside the fire, keeping a respectful distance so he would not startle her. "If the storm passes by morning, we can get to the outpost," he said quietly, letting his voice drift into the cold air. "There is shelter, medical help, real heat." She looked at him, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. Then she shook her head, slow and certain. Ethan frowned. "You do not want help?" She shook her head again. Her eyes flicked toward the distant tree line, toward the dark behind them, and then back to him. Not wanting help was not the issue. She did not feel safe going anywhere near other people. Ethan leaned back, letting the fire warm his palms. "Wherever you came from," he said softly, "I am not taking you back there. That is a promise." Her breath caught, a small sound, almost like disbelief. She studied him again with those quiet silver eyes, as if trying to measure the truth of his words. Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out a thermal blanket, unfolding the fabric so it rustled softly. He set it gently near her, close enough for her to reach, but far enough that she could choose to. After a long moment, she lifted the edge and wrapped it around her shoulders. The gesture was small, but he felt its weight. Acceptance was not always spoken. Sometimes it was the simple act of taking what was offered. The night grew colder. Ethan fed the fire a little more, mindful of the limited supply. She watched the flames with a different expression now, less fear, more cautious curiosity. "It is not like the fire you knew," he murmured. "This one keeps you alive." Her head tilted slightly, as if she was listening to more than his words. As the hours stretched, she became noticeably drowsy, her movements slower, her breathing softer. The warmth had finally begun to work. Ethan shifted his coat to cover more of her legs. She blinked up at him in surprise, then gently touched the sleeve in acknowledgement, a gesture so delicate it barely disturbed the air. Something in her posture settled after that, a subtle release of tension that had clung to her since he first found her. The moons drifted across the sky, and the firelight painted faint gold on her blue skin. For the first time, she looked almost peaceful. Ethan stayed awake, keeping watch, letting the quiet fill the space between them. And just before dawn, as the horizon hinted at a pale gray light, she leaned slightly toward the fire, her voice barely a whisper carried on the cold air, not words yet, but the attempt at sound. A beginning, a sign that morning might bring more than sunlight. The first thin line of morning light broke across the ridge, brushing pale gold over the snow and softening the harsh edges of the night. Ethan felt the temperature rise only a little, but enough for the air to sting less with each breath. He glanced toward the girl. She was still wrapped tightly in the blanket, her silver blue eyes half open as though she had been awake long before he noticed. Her attempts at sound from earlier lingered in his mind. Not words, not yet, but the beginning of trust. He crouched near the fire, now fading to glowing coals. "I need to check the skimmer," he said, speaking slowly so she could follow each word. "If it starts, we can get to a safer area. No towns, no people, just a small shelter point." She watched him closely, searching his face, and then gave a small nod. Ethan stepped over to the skimmer, brushing off the frost that had built around the panel through the night. The internal temperature sensor blinked a faint amber, and he exhaled in relief. It had held. Not well, but enough. As he worked, he kept glancing back at her. She had shifted closer to the remains of the fire, placing her hands out toward the warmth, this time without fear. A quiet milestone. When Ethan returned, she lifted her gaze. Her fingers curled and uncurled against the blanket, as if she wanted to say something but could not form the shape of it yet. "You feeling warmer?" he asked. She placed a hand on her chest, then made a small gesture outward, as though trying to say yes in a language she no longer trusted her voice with. Ethan smiled gently. "Good. We will take it slow." He offered her a small canteen. She accepted it with more confidence than the night before, taking steady sips. The color in her cheeks brightened slightly, a healthier shade beneath the blue. The wind rolled softly across the open snowfield, not sharp now, almost calm. She lifted her face toward it, her expression thoughtful. That was when Ethan noticed it. A faint mark at the base of her neck, partially hidden beneath the collar of his jacket. Not an injury, more like a symbol. But when she saw him looking, she pulled the edge of the jacket up quickly, her breath hitching. He raised both hands in reassurance. "It is all right. I was not trying to pry." For a moment, her eyes shimmered with something fragile, almost like embarrassment, but it faded slowly as she realized he meant what he said. He knelt a careful distance away, letting the fire's warmth bridge the space between them. "When you are ready," he said softly, "you can tell me what you want me to know. No pressure, no hurry." She blinked, a long, thoughtful blink, and lowered her head. But then she reached out, picking up a warmed heat pack, and gently set it near his hand. The gesture was deliberate this time, not uncertain. A clear message. She trusted him enough to share warmth back. Ethan accepted it with a quiet breath. "Thank you," he said. Her silver eyes lifted to meet his. And for the first time since he found her in the snow, the fear in them was softer, replaced by something else entirely. Not safety. Not yet. But the hope of it, fragile and shining in the early morning light. The morning light strengthened as the sun lifted above the ridge, turning the snowfield into a soft blur of white and gold. Ethan checked the sky for storm fronts, scanning the horizon in slow, practiced movements. Clear enough for travel, at least for a few hours. When he turned back, the girl was watching him again, her expression cautious but no longer frozen with fear. She held the blanket close with one hand while the other rested on the warmth pack she had given him earlier, as if wanting to remind herself that the exchange had truly happened. "We should move before the temperature drops again," Ethan said gently. "Not far. Just to a ridge shelter. It is quiet there." She hesitated, glancing toward the tree-line where long shadows stretched between the trunks. Something about that direction still unsettled her. Ethan stepped slightly to block her view of the dark. Woods, not intruding, just shifting so she could focus on him instead of whatever memory lived in the shadows. "You can walk with me," he said, "or I can support you. Either way is fine." She looked down at her feet, then slowly pulled herself up, gripping the jacket around her shoulders. Her legs trembled a little from cold and exhaustion, but she stayed standing. Ethan offered his arm without touching her. She studied it for several long seconds before lightly resting her fingers on his sleeve. Not a full grip, but a point of contact she controlled. They started forward across the snow. The morning air was crisp, with the faint crackle of ice beneath each step. She leaned just slightly toward him, using his steady pace to guide her own. Ethan slowed whenever she faltered, never rushing her, never letting her feel like a burden. The slope ahead led toward a small rise where he knew a natural overhang provided shelter from the wind. Halfway up, she paused, breathing shallowly, her eyes drifting again toward the distant woods. Ethan knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "You are safe," he said. "Nothing out here is looking for you." Her lips parted a little, as if she wanted to answer, but the words caught. She raised a hand to her throat, tapping lightly, then shaking her head. "It is all right," Ethan murmured. "You do not need to speak." She lowered her hand slowly, relief passing across her features. They continued their climb. As they neared the ridge, a soft gust curled around them, carrying the scent of distant frost and something faintly metallic from the frozen rock. She lifted her head to the wind, and for a moment her expression softened, almost peaceful. The sunlight reflected off her skin, giving her an ethereal glow that contrasted sharply with the bleak landscape. At the sheltered overhang, Ethan brushed snow away from a flat patch of ground and set down a small emergency heater. Its warm hum filled the quiet space, and she approached it cautiously. When she felt the heat, she exhaled a long, trembling breath, the tension easing from her shoulders. Ethan watched her settle, her hands open toward the warmth without fear this time. She looked at him with a question in her eyes, not spoken but clear. Why was he helping her so much? Ethan sat a respectful distance away, letting the silence stretch comfortably. "Sometimes," he said softly, "people just need someone to stay." Her fingers curled gently toward her chest, as if holding the words close. And for the first time, she gave him a small nod, one filled not with fear, but with fragile trust beginning to take root. The warmth from the small emergency heater spread gently across the sheltered hollow beneath the ridge, soft enough not to overwhelm the girl, steady enough to ease the lingering cold from her limbs. Ethan watched her settle into the blanket, her posture no longer rigid with fear. She held her hands toward the heater in small, cautious increments, as though still expecting it to flare unpredictably. When it did not, when the warmth stayed steady and harmless, her shoulders relaxed another fraction. The sun had climbed higher, spilling a pale glow across the snowfield below. Ethan checked his handheld scanner, tapping the frost from its surface. The signal was faint but stable. If they followed the ridge for another mile, they would reach the supply station he remembered. It was nothing more than a reinforced shelter pod with battery reserves and basic supplies, but it was safer than the open terrain. He looked up and found her watching him again. Her silver blue eyes reflected the snow's brightness, making them seem almost luminescent. "There is a place ahead," he said gently. "It is small, but it will keep us warm for longer." She hesitated, drawing the blanket closer. Her fingers touched the mark at her neck the way someone touches an old bruise, light and cautious. Ethan saw the movement and paused. "I will not let anyone near you," he said softly. "Not unless you want them there." For a moment she did not breathe. Then she lowered her hand and nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. They began walking along the ridge, moving at a careful pace. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the wind shifted into a quiet whisper instead of a howl. Ethan kept his steps steady, mindful of her tired legs. When she stumbled on a patch of ice, he offered his arm again. This time she took it without hesitation, her grip still light but certain. A small sign, but a powerful one. As they walked, he noticed her glancing upward. Thin clouds drifted overhead, trailing long, soft shadows on the ground. She seemed to study every shift of light, every ripple in the snow, as if memorizing a world she had not been allowed to observe peacefully before. Near the last stretch of the ridge, she suddenly stopped. Her breath quickened, not from exertion but from something else. She pointed toward a cluster of stones half buried in snow, her expression troubled. Ethan approached cautiously and brushed away the surface frost. The stones formed a small ring, old and weathered. There was no danger here, nothing harmful, but the sight clearly unsettled her. He stepped back and spoke softly. "It is all right. We can leave it behind." She looked at him, searching his face carefully, as if making sure he truly meant it. When she seemed satisfied, she moved closer to him again, choosing his presence over the shadows that lingered behind them. The supply station finally came into view, a gray shape against the bright terrain. Relief washed over Ethan. Once they reached it, he could get the heater on, recharge his skimmer beacon, and make sure she had proper shelter. But as they approached, she tugged lightly on his sleeve. When he turned, she touched her throat again, then shaped her lips in a silent attempt at a word. It did not come out, but the effort alone told him everything. She wanted to try. She wanted him to know something. Ethan nodded gently. "Take your time. I am here." Her eyes softened, warmed by something more than the heater or the sun overhead. And as she stepped toward the waiting shelter, she glanced back at him with a look that held both gratitude and a fragile courage beginning to rise within her. The supply station door released with a muted hiss as Ethan keyed in the access code, letting a wave of slightly warmer air roll outward. It was not much, only a few degrees above the freezing wind outside, but enough to soften the sharp bite of the cold. The girl stepped inside cautiously, her silver blue eyes sweeping over the compact interior. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with thermal blankets, nutrient packs, and emergency batteries. A small heater unit glowed in the corner, humming with a steady rhythm. Ethan activated the main lights, and a soft amber glow filled the room, gentle enough not to startle her. She approached the heater first, holding her hands near it, feeling the warmth settle deeper into her fingers. Ethan watched her shoulders drop slightly as the tension of the journey loosened. "You can rest here," he said quietly. "No one comes to these ridge stations unless they need to." She looked at him then, her gaze lingering longer than before. There was gratitude there, but also something heavier, like a truth pressing against the edge of silence. She touched her throat again, then lowered her hand as though disappointed in herself. Ethan shook his head gently. "Do not force it," he said. "When it is ready, it will come." She blinked slowly and sat on the bench near the heater. Ethan began checking the supply station systems. The long-range beacon needed a boost, the internal battery pack was only half charged, and his skimmer still required power before it could move again. As he worked, he heard a soft sound behind him, barely more than a breath. He turned. The girl had lifted her hand toward him, fingers trembling slightly. Not from cold, from effort. She shaped her lips again, trying to form a word. Nothing came out at first, only the faintest exhale. Ethan stepped closer, but stayed careful not to crowd her. "It is all right," he murmured. "Try when you are ready." Her eyes filled with a gentle determination. She pressed her hand lightly against her chest, as if anchoring herself, then tried again. A sound emerged this time, thin and fragile, but real. A single syllable, incomplete yet unmistakably voiced. The effort left her breath shaking. She clutched the blanket tighter, frustration flickering in her expression. Ethan knelt down so she could see his eyes clearly. "That was good," he said softly. "Very good." She stared at him, searching for any hint of pity. Finding none, she relaxed just a little. A moment later, her expression shifted. Her eyes drifted toward the small window in the station wall. Outside, the world was a white expanse stretching to the distant tree line. Something out there still frightened her, something the warmth could not erase. Ethan followed her gaze, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. No shapes. No shadows. No signs of pursuit. But fear did not always need proof to be real. He moved closer to the window, pretending to inspect the structural seal, giving her the reassurance of his presence without drawing attention to her fear. "We are safe here," he said. "No one knows we are on this ridge." She drew a slow breath, her shoulders easing. Then she reached into the blanket, pulling out the small heat pack he had given her earlier. She held it out to him again, not as an exchange this time, but as a sign, a bridge between them. Ethan accepted it gently. When he met her eyes, they held something new, not just trust, something deeper, a readiness, a quiet decision forming behind them. Whatever truth she had carried through the snow, whatever fear had chased her into the cold, she was preparing to share it. And morning was no longer far away. Inside the small ridge station, the heater's steady hum filled the quiet as the daylight softened into a pale afternoon glow. The girl sat near the warmth, her blanket wrapped snugly around her shoulders, but her gaze kept drifting toward Ethan with an attention that was no longer guarded, only uncertain. Ethan adjusted a power cell on the skimmer beacon, listening to the faint click as it locked into place. The signal should be strong enough to reach a patrol route by nightfall, though he knew rescue was not the first thing she wanted. When he turned back toward her, she was already watching him, her silver blue eyes reflecting the amber light of the heater. Something in her expression had shifted. The fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had softened, replaced by a fragile readiness. She lifted her hand, tapping her chest lightly, then trying to shape a word again. Ethan knelt beside her, so she would not strain her voice. "Take your time," he said gently. She inhaled, slow and steady, as though gathering the courage to climb a hill she had been avoiding for months. When she exhaled, a sound formed, soft but clearer than before. A single word, barely above a whisper. Her name. Ethan repeated it softly, so she knew he had heard. Salix. She blinked with surprise, then relief washed over her features. She nodded once, a small affirmation that she had chosen to share something sacred. He offered a warm smile. It is good to meet you, Salix. For a moment, she simply breathed, as if letting the sound of her own name settle inside the room. Then her expression dimmed slightly, and she reached for the small heater, pressing her palm. Near the glow, she pointed at the warmth, then drew her hand upward, as if tracing rising flames. Her throat tightened. Ethan understood enough to sit closer, keeping his voice level and calm. It is all right, he said. You can show me. You do not have to speak yet. She swallowed, touched the mark near her neck, and looked away, her breath trembling. It was not the fire itself that frightened her. It was the memory attached to it. Slowly, she lifted both hands and shaped a gesture, cupping them together and opening them like something being taken away. Ethan watched quietly, piecing the meaning together. Something she had lost. Someone. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with a depth of sorrow she had carried across the frozen night. She managed another sound, a soft syllable that quivered in the air. Not a full word, but a direction. A beginning. Ethan repeated it gently, letting her know he understood she was trying. You ran, he said softly. And someone hurt you. She did not look at him, but she did not deny it. Instead, she reached toward him with a trembling hand, not touching, just hovering close. A silent plea for him to stay where he was, to let her finish in her own time. He nodded. I am here. The wind outside brushed softly against the walls of the station, the snow shifting in slow drifts. Salix took another breath, steadying herself. This time, when she shaped her lips around the next sound, her voice emerged faint but clear enough to fill the quiet room. A single whispered word. A truth she had held alone for far too long. And with that one fragile whisper, Ethan finally understood that her fear was not only of being found, but of being believed. The single whispered word lingered in the warm air of the small station, fragile but steady, as if speaking it had cost Salix more than the long miles she had crossed through the snow. Ethan did not move. He let the silence hold, let her see that the truth she had offered would not break anything between them. Salix drew the blanket closer and shifted her gaze toward the heater's faint glow. Her breath softened, no longer shaking, and when she finally looked back at him, her eyes were clearer than they had been since the moment. He found her collapsed in the cold. She touched the mark at her neck again, but this time she did not hide it. Her fingers rested lightly on the symbol, tracing its outline with a calmness she had not shown before. Ethan met her eyes gently. You are safe here, he said. You do not have to run anymore. The smallest nod tugged at her chin. She lifted one hand, reaching slowly, and rested her fingertips against his sleeve. Not pulling, not asking, just grounding herself in the presence that had not once asked her for anything in return. Outside, the wind shifted, sweeping a curtain of soft powder against the station walls. The sound was low and distant, almost soothing. Salix turned her head toward it, listening. No shadows followed, no movement along the tree line, no reason for her body to tense the way it had the night before. She exhaled, deep and steady. Ethan returned to the control panel to check the beacon signal. The light pulsed a soft blue, the rhythm steady and bright. A patrol would pick it up within the hour. They would have warmth, safety, and a clear path away from the ridge. But when he glanced toward Salix again, he saw something in her expression that made him pause. Her eyes were fixed on him in a way that carried more weight than her whisper had. She wanted him to understand. Slowly, she stood, the blanket falling gently around her figure. Her steps toward him were small, but each one was certain. She stopped an arm's length away and lifted her hand once more, placing it over her heart, then extending it toward him. It was not a gesture of fear, nor of desperation. It was a gesture of trust, carefully rebuilt from silence and warmth. Ethan placed his hand over his chest in response, mirroring her motion. Salix watched the gesture settle between them, and the faintest warmth curved the corners of her lips. She stepped closer to the heater, letting the glow wrap softly around her blue skin. When she spoke again, her voice was still quiet, still delicate, but no longer uncertain. A second word, clearer than the first. Her reason, the truth of why she had run. Ethan absorbed it without flinching, meeting her gaze with a calm steadiness. "You did the right thing," he said softly. She blinked, the light catching in her eyes like distant stars. For the first time, she believed him. Morning edged closer, a faint golden sheen rising along the snowfield. Salix walked to the doorway of the station and looked outside. The world stretched open, bright and unthreatening. She turned back to him, her silver blue eyes reflecting the dawn. Not afraid, not silent, ready. And as the first beam of sunlight touched her face, Ethan saw it clearly. The moment she stopped being someone who had fled the fire and became someone who could stand in the light again.